the first thing I want you to do, give us some of the history on one of the more terrible accounts of racism, white supremacy, the race riots of East St. Louis in 1917. Now, I believe a lot of people haven't heard about that particular race riot. Enlighten us about it, please.
Well, yes, brother. A lot of people say 9/11 or even the Pulse nightclub was the worst violent episode in American history, and it's simply not true. East St. Louis is perhaps, if not number one, it's definitely number two. And if it were based on population, it's number one in terms of the number of people that passed. Now, let's do this real fast.
Mm-hmm.
The East St. Louis, they call it a race riot, but in reality, the better word for it, the word that Theodore Roosevelt called, is pogrom. I'm going to spell it out for you, Aretha Franklin style. Pogrom is P-O-G-R-O-M, pogrom. Pogrom is the word that you use when a group of people go in and exterminate another group of people because of their ethnicity.
Oh, so genocide, basically, another word for genocide.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm with family, so someone just stepped in here. Anyway, my brother,
no problem,
it's a genocide
Dr.
or
Short.
ethnic cleansing. And what happened in the case of East St. Louis, you had black people who had moved in. In fact, East St. Louis was actually a part of St. Louis, but over time it got given the name East St. Louis. It was a location east of the city of St. Louis. It's just across the Mississippi River. It was a place that was cutting edge in terms of aluminum smelting, aluminum mining, steel making, steel smelting, as well as 17 different major train lines operated through this location east of St. Louis, now called East St.
Mm-hmm.
Louis. Are you following me? So this was a
Yes,
place
sir.
that was called the Pittsburgh of the Midwest. And there were a lot of black people who had excellent jobs there because they knew how to operate boats going across the river. They had a lot of skills that they had mastered. And in addition to that, as that area blew up and grew rapidly, you had two groups of folks coming in. You had Irish coming down from Chicago, and maybe some Germans coming across from St. Louis. And then you had black Americans coming in. About 1917, as many as 20,000 or more blacks lived in East St. Louis. Understand that 1917 is the year that the United States entered the First World War. And so there was a boom, and this resulted in the first major black migration out of the South to the North. During that period of time, 2 million black people left the South for northern and western locations. In the case of East St. Louis, the blacks who were coming up from other places like Alabama, Mississippi, or Louisiana, they were coming in and they were working in factories. In many instances, the game that was played in the earlier part of the 1900s was that blacks were often denied the opportunity to work jobs where there were unions unless they were strike breakers.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of East St. Louis, the black folks tried to form a union and tried to get the whites, hey, look, let's all get a good wage and let's not fight each other. But the white folks were so racist and so hateful, refused to be in a union with black people, and in fact had the longest-serving head of the AFL, a racist Jew by the name of Samuel Gompers, who has a monument in your city of Chicago and a monument in my city of Washington. They brought in Samuel Gompers, who hated blacks, Asians, and Latinos, to come in to organize an all-white union for the miners and steelworkers. And because all blacks were accused of being scabs, there was this tension. In fact, Gompers helped instigate hatred against blacks in the city of East St. Louis. And it's not just this economic problem. As the number of blacks grew, they were almost a third or approaching a third to a half of the population in the city. And the blacks voted as a bloc. In fact, they were voting so effectively in southern Illinois that the southern Democrats, and they're supporting Midwestern anti-black racist Democrats, lost the congressional office in southern Illinois due to the black vote. And as a means to prevent the rollback of the racist southern segregationist control of the Democratic Party throughout the country, the National Democratic Committee from Chicago and Washington began to help instigate a violent repression of blacks in East St. Louis. In alliance with the Ku Klux Klan, an alliance with the AFL, an alliance with Veterans of Foreign Wars, an alliance with the 33rd Infantry, which is the Illinois National Guard, the Fraternal Order of Police, and many, many other white forces coalesced a conspiracy to destroy black people. And I need to include the white media of this time throughout the South and the Midwest made fantastic, farcical stories about black men raping and attacking white women and white people in the city of East St. Louis.
That's the playbook.
Eventually, yeah, it's textbook. Now, what ultimately happened is on May 28th, 1917. This is a year following the Democrats losing the election for the congressman there. A mob of 3,000 white men moved into the downtown of East St. Louis and began beating, raping, and killing blacks and destroying 270 buildings. This is in one day.
Dr. Short, could you just hold right there just for 1 second? I want to repeat something that you just stated. A mob of 3,000 white men. That is a lot of like-minded people that found each other in the same area. And I find that not only not astonishing, but we have to wake up and understand that just because somebody represents themselves to be one way, they could be a whole nother way in their private life. I just wanted to get that off my chest, Dr. Short, because 3,000 came together to decide to kill us, and don't think it can't happen again. But continue on, Dr. Short.
Let us continue. That was on May 28th. One of the things that happened, a black woman who had a relationship with a white man was publicly scalped. They cut her scalp off to intimidate black women who liked having sex with white men. And a black teenager was castrated and lynched. Now, from May 28th all the way up until July 1st, 1917, there were provocations and acts against the black community. In fact, the same sorts of things that were going on in Chicago at the time, where whites would drive through and shoot and throw bombs at black homes if blacks tried to leave the black area in Chicago, similar things were happening in East St. Louis. On the late night, July 1st, a group of white cars, different white cars, had been driving through, shooting at black people's homes if the lights were on. Some blacks shot back at an unmarked car that turned out to be a car with a policeman in it, and the policeman died. When that body was taken back and the man was pronounced dead, the white people vowed vengeance against the entire black community, and they claimed that it was a premeditated murder of the white man. July 2nd, 1917 was a Sunday. The white people waited until after the black people were coming out of church service to eat dinner to surround the black section of town, and they began burning and shooting and killing and raping indiscriminately men, women, and children. If you were on a tram car and you wanted to go back to St. Louis, but your church was across the river, you were killed. They systematically set fire to every black building that they could. And as the blacks tried to leave the buildings, they would shoot them. The only warning that the people had was certain churches were able to ring their bells to alarm people that whites had come to destroy them. The murder, in fact, the National Guard and the police helped mass kill black people. They hung them up by the lampposts throughout the city where blacks lived. There are stories of black women managing to escape from the buildings that were on fire with their babies, and the women had the babies taken out of their arms, and the babies were thrown into burning buildings. Some of the women were raped and then killed. The blacks who tried to get to the Mississippi River, there were whites there to drown them and prevent them from escaping. And so, as I said, there are fires and crowds of whites shooting into the streets trying to kill everyone. The one way that the blacks could escape was across the bridge, and the whites were sniping and shooting and killing people as they tried to escape. The firing and killing and shooting and raping and lynching continued until the 3rd, which is a Monday, because they wanted to celebrate the 4th of July, to have fireworks. And after the 4th of July, some of the violence and fighting continued. There was some resistance. Some blacks were able to use morticianers to collect the body, as there were bodies during ceasefires, and they would bring people out. They would put live people and children in the caskets under. They would put up below the bodies of dead people, so when they searched the caskets, they would see a dead person, but there'd be other people in it that they were taking out, but they wouldn't see them. Also, when they brought the caskets over, the blacks were bringing in guns to defend themselves from the white mobs. Mind you, the police and the National Guard led the murder of blacks in East St. Louis with the combat-grade weapons like what they had in Ferguson in 2014, the equivalent of that then.
So Dr. Short, this particular area of the country, because I was just going to bring up Ferguson, has been a hotbed for racism, white supremacy since going back to the 1800s, and they've it's never changed. And most people are not aware. Missouri is called the Show Me State. Missouri sent more people to fight in the Civil War on both sides in any area. Close to 300,000 Missourians fought in the Civil War. That's an astounding number. If you said 300,000 people from California right now served in Desert Storm, and there are like 40-plus million people in California, that would sound like a vast number. Imagine how thinly populated Missouri was in 1860. Between 60 and 65, that they put almost 1/3 of a million people in the field to show you how racist that place is. And just bringing this up to date, East St. Louis became an international embarrassment to the United States because our racist, segregationist Klansman President Woodrow Wilson, the same person who had D.W. Griffith scream The Birth of a Nation in the White House and called the lynching of a black rapist history written in lightning. Oh, my goodness.
Was known all over the world for promoting peace and understanding, but didn't do it in America. The Germans and other people were saying, if we want to know how the Americans are going to treat us if we lose, look at the Negroes in East St. Louis. That was to make the Germans keep fighting. We don't want to be like blacks.
Wow. So this particular story went worldwide.
It went worldwide, as did Ferguson, as did the Rodney King Rebellion, as did any black rebellion. The whole world looks at America and says, my God, freedom and democracy, really?
Right.
So much pressure was put on Wilson that they did have sort of investigations, and what they did, unsurprisingly, is they found somebody black to blame. Dr. Bundy, a black dentist in East St. Louis, was blamed for all the violence. they did charge some policemen. In fact, the whites were so bad, even some white policemen got convicted of misconduct. In light of Philando Castile and Ezell Ford and Austin Sterling, that you could get a conviction 100 years ago for police misconduct, and we can't get it now, and some coon's going to tell me we've made advances.
Right.
Show me. So think about it. They put mostly blacks in jail for genocide of the black community. Moving right along, the NAACP sort of got involved because they had that big march where they wore white and they marched to New York City. Okay. Mm-hmm. And Du Bois and them said they were upset and were demanding that. And the NAACP sort of for a second said that several hundred people had been killed. And then I guess some people threatened their white liberal money and the NAACP got quiet because the white papers at that time said hundreds and hundreds of blacks had been killed. And remember, if they burned alive in their homes, what remains exists. To this day, 100 years later almost, nobody has a real working figure of how many blacks were killed. No one ever did any research to find out of the 20,000, did 15 or 16,000 get away? They don't know. They did not check. I'll give you an example that this still continues. In that building, Grenfell Towers, the predominantly black and brown building that caught on fire in England and London in the Kensington-Chelsea section, as many as 500 people had died. They can only give an account out of at least 600 people that live in the building for where 70 are.
Wow.
They're suppressing the numbers because they understand they're going to be riots in London because the folks, it's very obvious that they were deliberately negligent. They made a nice lobby so when white folks came in, they could see the nice lobby, but they wouldn't put a sprinkler system in a building of that size. That was too much money. In the richest section of London, the people don't deserve sprinklers.
That's unbelievable.
Sound familiar? Now, you got my buddy's number I sent to you. You need to let these people call in and say that they just burned those people. And now they're blaming the folks and saying to them, well, you know, we did its best. Well, you should have come to the meetings. There's a record that these people had pleaded for order, pleaded for better treatment, for better housing, for proper improvements, and they fell on deaf ears. That's this past week. And we can look
Dr.
at
Short,
where the children.
Let me interrupt you just briefly, Dr. Short.
Mm-hmm.
You stated earlier on how prosperous East St. Louis was prior to this Berserker Act by the dominant white society. Mm-hmm. And to this very day, East St. Louis is a very impoverished area. I want you to talk a little bit about the destabilization of that community and how taking wealth and the transfer of wealth out of a community can devastate it for at least 100 years and running.
My brother, when East St. Louis, again, was one of the fastest growing cities in the country, approximately in 1950, East St. Louis was voted an all-American city with a population of about 80,000, one of the most prosperous small towns in America. But that's when it was predominantly white, and the black people's back had been broken in 1917. And by the way, between 1917 and 1920, a vast number of whites, as many as 10,000, moved into the city to get those jobs and opportunities. And they were unionized jobs, which meant they got decent wages. In fact, most people don't know that the whole idea of a minimum wage job, minimum wages, is based on making certain that whites got paid more than what blacks got paid across the board. The standard is a white had to be paid more than a black. That's the origin of the minimum wage. There's a minimum, but so little you can pay a white man. Okay, we're not going to stand for whites making what niggers make, pardon my language, but that's what they would have said.
Mm-hmm.
That's the origin. So the unions, these whites had union jobs. They were able to move up. They have an exclusive area called Belleville, Illinois, which is a sundown town where blacks aren't welcome, where that shooter, Hodgkinson, the one who shot the congressman, who, thank God, was shot by David Bailey, a black officer that they keep calling an injured policeman instead of a hero. When you face off a cracker with a machine gun with a pistol and he's face down, not you, and they emphasize the fact he got injured. I mean, WTF, folks. WTF. Now, the black people, let me finish your question. The black folks, therefore, when East St. Louis was rebuilt and the new businesses came in, our people lost not only, I said on the first day it was 270 buildings burnt. They destroyed the equivalent of about 50 city blocks. What would 50 city blocks in the loop mean to you? Because the blacks live near downtown. Aren't they trying to steal all of Bronzeville from y'all? Haven't they kicked the blacks out of Harlem?
It sounds like gentrification is not a new phenomenon.
It's
talk
never
about
been
it
a new
as
phenomenon.
though it's new.
In Boston, the most elite area is Beacon Hill. Beacon Hill used to be a black area. Blacks can't afford to live there. Capitol Hill used to be a black area in Washington, D.C. Blacks can't afford to live there. Inner Harbor used to be a black area. Blacks can't afford to live there. That's Baltimore. Bronzeville, a black area. Blacks can't afford to live there anymore. Harlem, black area. Blacks can't afford to live there anymore. I mean, how many times do I have to run this down to you? And pretty soon, the Ninth Ward of New Orleans, blacks won't be able to afford to live there anymore. Mm-hmm. It's about taking everything from a prosperous area. East St. Louis has given to the world several very, very, very great personalities. One of those great personalities was Catherine Denham, one of the prides of black dance art culture. In fact, Catherine Denham of East St. Louis is the mother of the Afro-Brazilian civil rights movement because she did the first sit-in at a hotel in Sao Paulo where she would not go through the back door or be treated like she was subhuman. And she sued in Brazil, and they passed the very first civil rights law in Brazil because of a black American woman named Catherine Denham.
And I'm reading over the notes that you sent me. She's the cousin of Lena Horne, correct?
Azima, this is a different person.
I'm looking at Catherine Kennedy. I'm sorry, wrong person. I stand corrected. Catherine Kennedy is the granddaughter of a woman that died in the Mississippi River fleeing the genocide. She went on to become one of the very first black mathematician physicists hired by NASA. This is one of the smartest people I've ever met. So she worked with the Hidden Figures people. They were just a class of employees or two ahead of her, but they were her friends. That's how smart this lady is. Her brother's a city councilman, Terry Kennedy, in St. Louis is her brother. And she has another brother named Gary who leads all the black cultural movements there in terms of dance and African history. And so NASA owes a great debt to the residents and the daughters and sons of East St. Louis.
Absolutely, and so does the Afro-Brazilian movement. The Alfonso Arias laws were the first civil rights laws passed where you couldn't discriminate against blacks in Brazil, passed in the early 50s. As a result, Miles Davis is a son of a dentist from East St. Louis. Josephine Baker, a civil rights advocate and actress and singer. The French liberation movement owes East St. Louis thanks. The jazz world owes East St. Louis thanks. McDougal, the black man who was the Secretary for the United States of the United Nations, is from East St. Louis. Flo Joe Kersey, the Olympian that won the gold medals, is from East St. Louis. A phenomenal area, a phenomenal cultural area. These people have nothing to be ashamed of. Southern Illinois is the Mississippi Delta in Illinois is just as repressive as the Mississippi Delta in Mississippi and Arkansas. The blacks
Absolutely.
in Cairo, Illinois, are destroyed. The blacks in Peoria, where Richard Pryor comes from, are destroyed. East St. Louis would have been a hub for empowerment for the whole region for black people, and they burnt it up in 2-3 days. There's never even been a recognition as to this really happening. And in addition to that, my friend, they don't know if they killed 200 or 4,000 or 5,000.
That's a travesty. And I would lean closer towards 4,000 to 5,000.
If you surround people in their homes and you set fires and you shoot at them and you come when they're stuck in their homes in the middle of the night, how are they going to even be able to find a way if things aren't lit to escape?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure the numbers have been greatly underreported.
The numbers that you'll see are 50, 60. The NAACP came up with a number that was about 200-300. Then they were told they couldn't use that number. And, of course, they wanted that white liberal money. So, well, it's indeterminate. Can you imagine if a couple of whites had been killed by black folks, they wouldn't have stopped until they found out every which one was missing.
Absolutely.
Now, what happened in East St. Louis? Like Gary, Indiana, a very wealthy city, once the whites decided to kill it because of the black power conferences that they had there in the early 70s, once the blacks got some power and began to stand up in East St. Louis, they pulled all the infrastructure out and the jobs out and left the blacks to die. Now, we need to remember something. One of the companies that was using black people to antagonize white people with wages was the aluminum ore company, better known as Alcoa. The same people that helped destroy the economy of Jamaica when the Jamaicans wanted a decent price for their bauxite. They stopped buying aluminum from Jamaica. When the people in Chile wanted a decent price for their aluminum, they got rid of Salvador Allende on September 11, 1972, killing thousands of people and plunging it into a dictatorship for decades. Same company. The same Alcoa company tells you that cooking with aluminum pots and pans and trays and wrapping your food in aluminum and grilling in aluminum is good when everyone that has any sense knows that aluminum is a neurotoxin and causes Alzheimer's. How many black people have sick family members who used to grill in the summertime when they would get together? I'm here with my family, and there's more aluminum here than Bolivia.
And they also put the aluminum in the antiperspirants as well.
Soda cans, everything. I'm allergic to aluminum. Aluminum I had to stop using sprays. The aluminum eats up my armpits. That's my first experience. It was 30 years ago. I sprayed with some deodorant, and it turned the skin under my arm. It caused necrosis. The skin all died, turned jet black. Aluminum
Absolutely.
is very
so
dangerous.
It's become a byproduct, and the propaganda wing of the aluminum industry use their propaganda to get their aluminum everywhere, guys.
And let me top it. What's a byproduct of aluminum mining? Fluoride.
I'm not sure. Tell me.
Fluoride.
Yes.
Fluoride.
Yes, I did know that.
And fluoride causes, dementia, birth defects.
And it's in your
diabetes.
AIM, Colgate, and Crest.
It's in everything.
As well as your municipalities' drinking water, more than likely.
And they know that black people absorb it at twice the rate of whites, so there's a lot of fluoridated water where there are black people. If you go through a black neighborhood, you're always going to find a dialysis place. because it causes renal failure. They're killing us with the water. The same aluminum people that allowed these blacks to be burnt alive in their homes have pushed aluminum and fluoride. And who dies? We do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Short, I want you to talk about the commemoration that's coming up, the 100-year commemoration of this particular Holocaust, and tell us a little bit about some of the festivities and some of the keynote speakers.
Okay. Let me open up my computer, but let me run this down. I'll do some of it off the top of my head. First and foremost, anybody that wants me to send them the program, they can write me at WRandy, RANDYSHORT, WRandyShort @gmail.com. I'm going to do it again because people don't listen. W as in water, R as in rain, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, D as in David, Y as in Yugoslavia, S as in slave, H as in horse, O as in orange, R as in rain, T as in Tom @gmail.com. I will send you our program. We're expecting the Honorable Dr. Cynthia McKinney, a 7-term congresswoman from the state of Georgia, human rights advocate, writer, and political commentator. We're expecting Brother Michael Graves of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement That Care. We're expecting Pam Africa and her husband Rajikan Shaheed. We are expecting Marcia Heshmi of Press TV. We're expecting Brother Cam Howard of the reparations movement in Chicago and in Cobra. And we are expecting the Archbishop John Lewis III of the African Orthodox Church based in Atlanta. And we expect others. Now, on the first day, we're going to do a tour of the different black areas. We're going to go to where they killed Michael Brown in Canfield Green. We're going to go where they shot Angelo Brown. Last June 23rd, it's almost a year since they assassinated the head of the Revolutionary Black Panther Party in Belleville, Illinois. We'll go to East St. Louis. We also plan to go to the first black civilizations, the so-called mound builders. In reality, they're many pyramid builders in the Mississippi Valley region, in Cahokia. And we'll also fellowship, have meals together, talk to each other. We will have some dances.
Dr. Short, let me just interrupt you just briefly. Guys, if you cannot make it for this, it would be a travesty. What Dr. Short just stated, you're going to get some history that you're not going to get too often. The mound builders, the original indigenous people, us. You're going to see pyramids, guys, along the Mississippi. But they're called mounds, showing us, and it's actually showing us here from a very historical context. I just had to get that in, Dr. Short.
We've always been here. This land is our land. You've got two homes. You got Africa and you got here. And don't give up either. They got Europe in here. Why can't you have two homes? If you had a lot of money, you want more than one house. All right. Moving right along. On July 2nd, we're going to be having a day-long ceremony on the Eads Bridge. The Eads Bridge was the only route of escape for blacks out of East St. Louis. And even then, they were being shot at, and people were trying to kill them as they got out of the city. Some people were able to take boats or whatever, but ultimately, we'll be there. There will be political leaders, civic leaders, and other speakers. In fact, one of the people that will come will be former CIA officer Robert Steele, who will be announcing the Summer of Peace, because we understand from our sources that there are a group of white people who want to create a race war against black people starting on July 2nd of all days.
Really?
We absolutely, hey, y'all, my saying, I want you to repeat after me, get strapped. Say it.
Get strapped. Dr. Short, I've been saying that forever and a day on this show.
Stop
being afraid of firearms.
Get strapped or get tapped.
Absolutely.
I want to give my hats off to the Hundreds of thousands of African Americans that bought guns in the month of May. We need millions to buy them in June and July. I don't like gun crime, but I love lawful gun owners. I come from a family of gun owners, so I thank God for gun owners. I'm here at the home of my cousins, and we were all talking about how the survival of our family has been linked to the men and women in our family that love firearms that didn't take mess. And we were also talking about our cousins, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Emmett Till, and our cousin Bill Cosby. You know that woman that looks like Howard Stern and walks like Andy Griffin. She's lucky if Bill Cosby did anything with her. She should have a coke and a smile and shut the hell up. Okay,
right.
I mean, I'm sorry I had to get that in there. So, Eads Bridge, we're going to be there. We're going to lay a wreath for those who weren't able to make it out of the city. And our goal is to have a historical truth society. And we don't want to limit it to East St. Louis, because what I need to emphasize is that there were people in the city of Chicago, people who are friends to Mayor Daley, the one that's deceased, and the father of the one living. The people in Chicago helped engineer the genocide in East St. Louis. And they tried to do the same thing. Just 2 years and 3 weeks later, they tried to do the same thing in Chicago in 1919. We want to form a group that travels the country, that educates people to the pogroms and the genocides and the cleansings that happened in Knoxville, Tennessee, Longview, Texas, Chester, Pennsylvania, Chicago, even Washington, D.C. And I need to emphasize before I talk about the third day, which is July 3rd, that the Honorable Marcus Garvey's UNIA was formed in response to the East St. Louis genocide, in case you didn't know that. East St. Louis gave Marcus Garvey the support that he needed for the Back to Africa movement. The East St. Louis genocide caused tens of thousands of black people to join the NAACP. More importantly, the East St. Louis genocide resulted in tens of thousands of African Americans arming themselves. In fact, the famous Howard University mathematician, PhD, Kelly Miller, warned that there would be violence in Washington, D.C. And so blacks in Washington began arming, preparing for the inevitable, because Washington, D.C. had the richest black community in the country, and it was obvious we were next. And lo and behold, on July 21st, 1919, the same thing that happened in East St. Louis, downtown Washington, D.C., whites began to pull black people off streetcars, lynch them, beat them, and rape them. And it's only because black folks had invested in firearms and in unity that they themselves had their own drive-by shooting units to defend themselves. And they beat. For every black person that was face down, there were 4 whites, which is why you never hear about the D.C. race riots. You only hear about Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And you know what, Dr. Short? That's the power of propaganda. The enemy will never highlight their defeats. Never. That's why people like yourself and other historians within our community, you guys are so valuable to be able to bring to light military victories, because that's what they were, military victories.
My brother, to this day, the U.S. Military Intelligence Agency has kept their report on how the blacks in D.C. beat the white people a secret of national security. Absolutely. What you don't know is that black folks took the fight to the U.S. military base, to the U.S. military hospital, and shot it out with them. They weren't going to take it. Black people who could pass for white tricked whites to follow them into ambushes where they would hide, and the blacks would smoke up white terrorists. The blacks beat the white people so badly, Woodrow Wilson, who did nothing for East St. Louis, intervened in D.C., even though initially he could hear on his yacht in the Potomac River black people being stomped and beaten to death, and he chose to do nothing. It's only when white folks were being machine gunned on 7th Street, which is, and Florida Avenue, which you also call U Street, where the black people fought them. When the black people fought them, that's when, and they lost, that's when they stepped in. And I'm telling you right now, these alt-right people will only understand being face down. The government will step in, Donald Trump and everyone else will understand that you can't mistreat people who will not stand for it. When they face losses, that's when they'll start calling race a problem, when they lose.
Right. Absolutely, Dr. Short. Dr. Short, we have 7 minutes left in the program, and I want to thank you.
Third. The third will be at St. Mark's Church. St. Mark's Church, Cynthia McKinney and others will be having panels and meetings. St. Mark's Church in Ferguson is where the people gathered during the Ferguson Rebellion. So we'll be there from about 1 p.m. to 6 p.m.
And that's going to be on the 3rd.
The 3rd. So we have 3 days of activities. And don't worry if you can't make this one. If you live in Chicago and you're interested in being a part of a committee for us to do the Centennial in Chicago and the Centennial in Washington, the Centennial, we want to take this all over the country because a lot of our people have no idea. We're told it's our fault we're where we are today. You know what? I can be a drunk, but if you clip me up and throw me in the mud, I didn't get muddy by myself. Huh? If I have money and you steal it from me, I didn't get poor by myself.
Absolutely.
So all I want to say to your audience, they can write me. I will happily send them. In fact, there's a good website I'm going to point everybody to. I just got it, and hold on one second. I'm looking for it. I'll have it 1 second. I will tell you where people need to write. Here it is. There's a website called teachsociety.org. That's teachsociety.org. You can make a donation. If you can't come, send people $5. We can buy stuff with that. Do something, give something. This is not going to happen. Those white people who burnt East St. Louis had folks to buy torches, and I have to say this. In East St. Louis, the white women went around with weapons and sticks and Molotov cocktails demanding that if you're a real white man, go kill black men and women.